Now, this, I think, segues neatly from what Michael was just saying, which is the criminal justice system is adversarial by design, and that can sometimes discourage revisiting past decisions. How do we ensure a CCRC is oriented towards truth-finding rather than just defending past outcomes?
Okay, I'll start it off. I think we've been hearing a lot about that in the talks that we've already had. The thing that stands out for me is really that idea of needing to start from scratch, needing to start that investigation without the former kind of errors that could have happened and did happen in the case. Those errors can get compounded. If you can think about the errors that happen in the investigation, they don't always get recorded or they don't always get revealed in a timely manner, especially, and then that gets passed down to trial. The other thing that I was going to say is that truth-finding aspect is what is really important, and the data set that I've put together, that is really just the tip of the iceberg. I know that if you read the wrongful convictions research, that's what we always say is tip of the iceberg, because that's actually what it is. You know, when I'm collecting cases that have already kind of come to light by others. So what gets missed are what we talked about earlier as well, the more minor crimes, but still the harm to those victims is very real. Those consequences are very real when you're spending time in prison for something that you didn't commit, or when you have had your freedom taken away from you, whether you spent time in jail. You know, these are all consequences. And some research that I did with a PhD student, Caitlin Nash, who's now at the Department of Justice, that we did on guilty pleas, is looking at exactly that. And what we found, which is why truth finding is very important, these cases don't get to go through that adversarial process. Correct? Like they don't get all those safeguards that are in place. Not that those safeguards work very effectively all the time, but once you have that guilty plea, you know, Australia has this wonderful thing called the Meisner plea, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to get into it too much. But once you claim that you're guilty, then it's not recorded that you're innocent, pleading guilty for other reasons, like you might have been pressured, you want to go out and see your kids, you want to, you know, there are other reasons why you might be innocent. And pleading guilty, that doesn't get looked at. So, you know, that truth-finding aspect, I think, is an important one for all cases. And just what was mentioned with Amy and Martin is that we've also got to look at the smaller cases and just to see the scale of the problem, too. And as a criminologist, you know, I'm not working on individual cases, but I'm trying to better understand how is it that we're getting to this place where we see a complete breakdown of the system. Like a wrongful convictions is the breakdown of a system. All our safeguards that we had in place haven't worked. So the chance for a CCRC is great because, you know, whatever it looks like in the end, it'll be better than what we have.
I just think for me, the people that are going to be involved in the CCRC are going to be the core and the heart of it. So therefore, yes, your truth finding, you need to have those people that are strong-minded and aren't swayed by opinions, be it from politicians, other lawyers, you know, judges or anybody else. If they are going to investigate and accept, you know, even if it is an individual case or if we're looking at something that's broader, you need to find those people that can operate independently without being influenced in any way by anybody else. It needs to be an open and honest sort of thing to do. Otherwise, you will. It'll revert straight back to just following and towing a line or brushing things under a mat or just taking an easy way out because you don't want to actually face and deal with the harder sort of cases or stuff you need to do. That's my view on it.
I think the adversarial system is obviously inescapable at the moment in this country, and it does have some benefits. I'm still yet to kind of figure them out, but you know, we're told that they do. I think that a CCRC or a body similar to that, with the multi-level of review, is a really good way of working on a case. So with Kath, I had a barrister that I worked very closely with, who is the best human being alive, and we would check each other regularly. So, we're not perfect, but at least we weren't operating in a sort of sheltered workshop just on our own. And I think that sort of defensive mindset can be in all of us who have been trained as lawyers, because that's kind of what we're trained to do, is we're trained to defend the system and, I guess not call out our colleagues as we might have to in certain instances. But I also think another thing that in anyone that's working in a commission needs to be trained in things like cognitive bias and all of these things, as well as the scientific method, for example, because being able to understand your own bias is half the battle to say, okay, well, what are my assumptions here, and are these playing a role in how I'm making this decision?
Yes, well, I think it's the expense and time that is taken once you reach the point that the appeal remedies are exhausted and you're still in jail. Every wrongly convicted person is going to either do one of two things. Or they're going to give up, and if they survive prison, they'll try and get out and get on with life as it's going to be, or else they don't survive and they die in prison. If, however, the person still wants to prove their innocence, and to the exonerees that are here, both Kathleen and Terry and others in the audience that I know, you need to prove your innocence for yourself and that of your family. Now, that involves getting somebody, whether it's a CJC in Queensland or CCC as it is now, to declare to the community that she really didn't do this, that the mistakes have continued through. Now, we had the fortunate position in Terry's case that we got to the High Court, and the High Court was right on to exactly what had gone wrong in this case. And that was quickly disposed of in Terry's favour. They quickly found that the case was a very disturbing case, which very strong words used by the High Court, that there was a major miscarriage of justice, and they released Terry virtually straight away after he paid off a couple of traffic fines. But what there happened was that the quest for exoneration in the eyes of himself, his family, and everything else was still an issue, and it's that particular problem that a CJC or a double CRC would be able to look to in terms of looking at the evidence that had gone through, and also in looking at issues like compensation, looking at issues like apology and other details. So I think the time that we spent, 32 years, in trying to get that level of exoneration, not only in the courts, but amongst the community and amongst people generally, where governments continued to say, well, I don't care what the court said, we continue to think that he's guilty and we're not going to pay any compensation, we're not going to apologise. I think it would be a strong factor in favour of that person being able to easily access a remedy to deal with the aftermath of wrongful conviction.
Thank you, Michael. And Terry.
The breadth of the problem we're all aware of. It's been well elucidated today. But I think in the structure of it, I think probably the best way of dealing with it is that we've got the magistrates' courts, we've got district courts, Supreme Courts, and then the appeals courts. So if the structure of the CCRC was to look at those on an individual basis, we might be able to narrow down where the problems are at an earlier point, rather than just look at, okay, it's a wrongful conviction. A wrongful conviction can happen in many ways, whether it's you get a parking fine, could be a wrong thing because you don't pay it and you end up in jail. There's so many degrees of it, and I think if we're going to talk about the construct of a CCRC, possibly the best way to review what is required of it is to look at where the problem is in the magistrates' court, where it is in the district court. I know there's the issue of evidence in so many areas. In situations the coppers are a big problem. But those things would be revealed at those levels, and then there's got to be some accountability. for those that do wrong, because it's a deterrent factor. It's used by politicians often. Lock them up. People are scared to be locked up. They won't commit the crimes. We'll reverse that around and say, you do a wrongful conviction, you pay for that.
There's unfortunately a resistance in Queensland to that type of intervention into that type of misconduct.
Apparently.
Andrew, if I could just make one further comment on this, because I think it's really important. In the spirit of truth-telling, there's been a lot of dirty behaviour in Kath's case, even up until right in the day, and I'll probably get sued for defamation for saying this, but, you know, whatever. I've got nothing anyway. They can take my Yaris. So when we were fighting for compensation for Kath, the Premier's office was actually backgrounding journalists to say that Kath wasn't innocent. And they were briefing them actively things. And then when put to them, hey, this is what you're saying, they said, we'll deny it. So this is the sort of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that we have to contend with. Not only Kath was then acquitted, and we can talk all that we want about the wording that they use, reasonable doubt versus innocence, because it is complex, far more than we have discussion for today. But there's a willingness to accept a conviction, but then when there's less willingness to accept an acquittal. And it is because of political convenience. And for the likes of the Premier of the state and the Attorney-General to be doing things like that is just disgraceful behaviour. You can't be going and backgrounding journalists to try and get your story out there because you don't want to pay compensation. I mean, this is disgusting behaviour, and we need to have a system that has some sort of it's not just up to the grace, because there is no grace. There's no grace at all. So, yeah, I thought I'd just share that with you because it's so important. And there is no mechanism of accountability. For Kath and me, the true story will be from a documentary, and we'll have to be worried about if we're going to get sued for telling the truth, because other people who are in the system are beholden to, say, legal aid for their work, and they don't want to stand up and say anything, or the journalists don't want to put their name to it because they'll ruin their connections with the people that they rely on for stories, or all of these interpersonal connections that people, and I don't criticise them because sometimes you can't speak up, but without having some sort of independent mechanism, we are just at the behest of politicians